Louis, right now our special guest is one of the most brilliant interviewers in the interview business.
Right.
We're talking about Dick Cavett joins the show.
Hi, Dick. How are you?
I couldn't imagine who you were talking about.
You're doing this series at the Ridgefield Playhouse. You're doing an interview series, and people are really excited about this. You got Blythe Danner coming up.
Yes. You know, I was just looking up Blythe's record of jobs and shows and TV and movies and plays. I don't think she's had a minute of her life that she wasn't performing. God, she is so brilliant and can do so many things.
Will you be nervous?
Probably if she starts talking dirty.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Dick, who is a good interviewer? I mean, you've done this for so long. You know the ins and outs of what a good interview is. Who impresses you with their interviews?
Oh, who impresses me?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a tough one.
Yeah, there's so many.
Well, actually, it is in a way because singling out just the late night shows and hosts, I've almost had to make it a sound rule that I don't, if one of them is brought up in a conversation, I can't really talk about them because the others get annoyed. And more seriously than that, I know them all. So if I mention one, I run into another one 10 minutes later on the street. He says, I hope you mentioned me.
You know who I was impressed? Alec Baldwin is really impressive.
Alec is a genius. Alec and I made some kind of history in his life and mine because he came out to my house in Long Island to do his first chat bit, and it was just wonderful. In fact, I know it was wonderful mostly because people say, I just heard it. I've listened to it several times. It was his very, very, very first podcast, and I didn't know him that well, but we hit it off in such a way that's almost magical. It doesn't happen very often, and it produced a golden show.
Do you feel like, does it bleed over into your personality? Are you asking probing follow-up questions at cocktail parties?
Yes, I've been slapped for that several times by famous and legendary people. But as they say in comedy, seriously, folks, I should tell you a story. You may have heard it, but it doesn't matter. I tell it so well.
Yes, please. Yeah.
It's just a very brief incident in my life, but it was just before I was starting to do the ABC show in the morning of 1968, and to my amazement, the phone rang about 2 months earlier than the beginning, and it was either someone imitating Jack Parr or Jack Parr. In all the years I've knew Jack and worked for him, he never called me, but this was the one time. And what he said was, when I said, "Do you have any advice for me?" He said, "I do, kid. Whatever you do on the show, don't do interviews." And I thought, well, what am I supposed to sing with the guests? Or what? He said, no, interviews. That's flat. That's cut and dried. That's Q&A. That's what's your favorite this and what's your favorite that. And David Frost falling over in a stupor on his front of his clipboard. Make it a conversation. Paused for a moment and thought, my God, that is what's best. That's when it gets good. That's when you throw away your notes immediately, and you and the guest have hit off in some way or other that really produces a much better show. And when I began, I made that mistake of I was terrified at first, in charge of a 90-minute show. I'd never done that before. I would ask something, and again, it shouldn't be just questions, but talk. And it would lead to something, and I would ignore what the guest said and move on to my next written-out note. An exaggerated version of it, I guess. Maybe it isn't exaggerated. When I began to realize I was really doing that. Imagine I had a guest saying, and we recovered the old rusty trunk from underneath the sand, and we hesitantly opened the lid, and you'll never guess what was inside. And I would say, do you have any hobbies? It was maybe not quite that bad, I hope.
We're talking to Dick Cavett, coming to the Ridgefield Playhouse for an interview series. Now you got me second-guessing myself, Dick. I'm going to throw out my notes. They got to go. They got to go.
I hear the paper being crunched.
How did you ever deal?
No, but you must know that's true, that the best thing that can happen is not that they can tell you what movie they just made, that they're so excited about, the most overworked word in television. But when it suddenly starts to flow and it's the two of you chatting, and that's what you really should work for. It's a crazy business.
Who surprised you that you did have that flow with, that maybe you thought, I don't know if this guy and I are going to hit it off, and then you end up hitting it off?
It's easier to answer. You end up not hitting it off. That would be Spiro Agnew.
Wow.
I don't want to mention his name, but his initials are Spiro Agnew.
Look, and I'm fascinated with the fact. I mean, you've interviewed so many people, but you interviewed John Lennon. I was brought up in that era. You know, I'm like 68. What was it like to interview John Lennon?
Wait a minute. You were brought up in the interview that the Beatles first came, or?
I'm 68, so I grew up with the Beatles, and John Lennon was one of my favorites, and you talked to him. What was that like?
Yeah, well, I guess I'd have to say it wasn't like anything. It was unique. I was surprised. I'd met John just briefly before. I went over and visited them at their hotel before doing the show, and it was interesting. It was the St. Regis Hotel, an old hotel. And they had a huge suite with like 20-foot ceilings. And there was a big bed, and it was covered with, what would you say, projects, folders, articles, things they were clipped for stuff they were doing. And they were both sitting on that working on two projects, like two students in law school or something. And so people are disappointed that I found the Lennons in bed, but working with folders. And then I got in a movie of John's while there. I've never seen it, but he had me stand in a row with four other people, like having a crime photo made, and whisper something to the person next to me, and then the person, and so on. And he used that in a film, and he had been making this thing impromptu, and I said, who'd you get besides me today? And he said, nobody, but yesterday we got Fred Astaire.
Oh, wow.
They ran into him in the lobby, and he said, sure, I'll be in your movie. And he waltzed with Yoko.
Dick, how did you not
I would have preferred Ginger Rogers.
Yeah.
How do you not see a movie that you're in? I can't relate to that. I got to see a picture I'm in. You know, if I'm on Instagram, I got to see the photo. How do you miss a movie that you're in with John Lennon? I'd have to see it.
When I find out how, I'll tell you so you can do it too. I don't know. I've just never run across it. I don't know if it first appeared on television or in theaters or what.
My ego would not allow that.
You're not suggesting I'm cut out of it, are you?
No. I'm just saying my ego wouldn't allow me to not see it.
Well, there are times when you've seen quite enough of yourself.
Yes.
But I do, now that you mention it, I hadn't thought of that, but I remember the first time I saw myself up there on the screen in a professional production. It was called Sergeant Bilko, and I got a job as an extra in an episode called Bilko's Godson. And they brought it was in a set in a university, so they brought all the young actors in who were playing the students, and I knew enough to sit next to Phil Silvers, who was pretending he was a young student. It was a very funny episode. But I remember Milton Berle saying, always be doing something when you're not the focus. So I tapped my pencil on the desk. Like, what am I going to do here? Oh, God, trying to think, tapping my pencil. And thus, I came up same size as Phil Silvers on the screen in a two-shot. Later, I learned that he said to the casting guy, where'd you get the kid with the pencil?
He's going to be big, I tell you.
It's a good story. But that first moment when you see yourself screen size is pretty shocking. Takes your breath away. Unfortunately, it wears off after a few more times.
Well, Dick,
I still like to see myself in Beetlejuice.
Dick Cavett. We could talk to you for hours.
I know.
And we're going to, of course, direct everybody to go check you out at the Ridgefield Playhouse in this interview series. It's ridgefieldplayhouse.org. The first interview with Blythe Danner. And
the divine Blythe Danner.
She is wonderful, and we know a lot of people are excited about it.
Yeah. Well, good. Good for them. Hope they show up.
Oh, I think you'll be sold out. That's what I'm thinking. Dick Cavett, It was an honor speaking with you. Thanks so much for spending some time with us.
Thanks for a few minutes.
Thank you for making it so pleasant.
Sure. Take care.
They don't all do that.
Yeah. Thanks.
Okay.
There you go. I feel like a knucklehead when I talk to somebody that accomplished. You feel like a knucklehead?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're knuckleheads.